same way in that, having done sensory processing work for, almost 20 years, and then I completed the infant parent mental health fellowship almost 4 years ago. It was like two worlds emerged for me and just emerged together, I should say. And it was so wonderful to have many pieces to the puzzle start coming together. And I've also enjoyed the interprofessional approach to infant mental health too. I would I would love you side by side seeing clients with me too, Claudia.
Well, we'll do it someday.
Yes.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. I'm very excited. I like talking about sensory processing. So there's a good thing there's a time limit to this. I am gonna share my screen. That worked. That's good. And, oops. I don't know why that said that. Okay. So the title, The Role of Sensory Processing on Regulation, Behavior, and Relationships. And some of the things, this is a topic that we can take in so many different directions and can include many things about sensory processing. But, first and foremost, it's really kind of understanding what is sensory processing and how does it contribute to function, and going on and thinking about how that impacts relationships. Not only, we are going to be thinking about the infant, the child, but we're also going to be thinking about what this means for the parent too. So we're going to be looking at the different sensory organs and systems that we have and how that impacts development and function. How can we identify when there's challenges in processing sensory information? How does this influence relationships? And if there's time, we'll think about how we include sensory-based work into clinical practice. So again, if there's questions along the way, the chat box is open. I can be stopped to ask any questions that you have, as well as I will be stopping periodically just to kind of check in. Okay. So I will start here. Dr. Jean Ayers was the occupational therapist who first developed the idea of sensory processing, thinking more about it as an assessment and an intervention approach. She mostly worked with children who had learning disabilities, and her theory and her practice still continues now. There's a lot of gratitude to the work that she put in to the field, as well as she was certainly a woman ahead of her times. Some of the principles in her theories and approach to intervention are coming out in, brain science now. So sensory input everywhere. We are all sensory beings. We take in sensory information at every second, every minute of our lives. And this information comes in from our internal landscape as well as from our external world. So what are our senses? Cue the dog, by the way. It must be one of my children at home, so that's good news. Oops, and this is not moving. Did the slides move on your end? Okay, they're not moving on my end. Oh, there we go. Aha, here we are. So our senses. We have our vision, we have auditory, which is hearing, gustatory, our taste sense, olfactory, our smell, tactile, which is touch. We have proprioception, vestibular, and interoception. Now, for this particular presentation, I'm going to be focusing in on our tactile system, proprioception, vestibular, and interoception. These I see as, first, I think that they're senses that they are not as common to everybody, as well as they provide a foundation for so many areas of not only of how our brain is built, but also how we use it for skill. So the first one I'll talk about is our tactile system. And obviously our tactile system involves our skin. And so living under our skin are many receptors that detect different types of touch. Some of that touch includes light touch, deep pressure, temperature, vibration, and pain. And the reason our tactile system has to detect this is number one, for protection and keeping us safe, but also for skill. And the thing with touch is there are areas of our body that have a higher density of tactile receptors, and not only do they have a higher density at the site, but also in our brain they have a larger landscape of how much information they will take in. And so these areas happen to be our hands, our feet, our mouth, some areas of our face, our genital areas. These are all very sensitive areas that we need to be more astute to tactile information. The other thing with touch, and I think this will come in from a clinical lens, if you've worked with babies, children, toddlers, and such, is that different types of touch run on different neurological pathways. So lighter touch and pain happen to run along a different nerve pathway that goes more to our arousal and our alert centers in our brain. Number one, to keep us safe. And then some of the deep pressure vibration kind of senses go to more of the areas that are more what we call discriminatory and help us to determine what kind of touch that is. And this really helps from a clinical perspective because a lot of times you'll see sensitivities in that light touch area. And people who experience sensitivities to light touch have also described it as painful because it runs along the same nerve pathway. So I put these images here because I think it kind of gives us a visual of how we use our tactile system. And our skin being our largest organ, we are getting in a lot of tactile information at one time. And if we think specifically of the infant who does not have the developed language and motor organization skills or cognitive processes, much of how they're learning about their world is through touch. And so we can look at these pictures and think about that this type of touch that's happening here is what's creating more of a calming, regulating experience. And this is the type of touch that would flood our nervous system with oxytocin and other sort of feel-good hormones like serotonin and dopamine. And so it makes me think of when we were talking about Dr. Porges's idea of safety. You know, these are creating those messages of safety to our nervous system, this kind of touch. But then it also makes me think about what happens if this type of touch does not feel good to this baby. What happens if this type of touch doesn't feel good to the mom or the caregiver? And so, you know, what happens then? What kind of messages are they getting about that experience? And so if we think about also touch is not just working by itself, there's actually a lot of research to show that, you know, for example, like affective cues, like a person smiling and touching you often creates more pleasant sensations versus a face that's not smiling and touching you. And so, you know, we have to think about the mother who might be, and I'm using mother here. We can kind of, you know, fill that into caregiver, primary caregiver, father. But what about that parent who is more, I'm going to use the word defensive or sensitive to touch? What might their facial expression be in those micro moments of time? So, and then obviously the elephant in the room that we've talked about is COVID, and, you know, how we aren't experiencing touch around us all the time. And And what has that, I'm going to say, touch deprivation also done for us? So there's a lot of really interesting research by Tiffany Field. She's a touch researcher, as she'll call herself, and has some, not only, she has a really nice book about touch, but has a lot of some of the latest research and some of the impact of touch on many areas of not only infant development, but just mental health as well. So our other sense, our proprioception. Proprioception, the receptors for this are found in our muscles, our joints, and fascia. And fascia, for those of you who may not know, there's this little thin sheath of kind of flexible material that lives around our muscles and lives around all of our muscle spindles. And it has some of the highest density of proprioceptive receptors in it. And fascia is everywhere. So it's an amazing thing. In fact, that was something very exciting I did over COVID, was learn more about fascia. But what that does, all of those receptors taking in information from our muscles and our joints, helps us build our body map. That idea of body awareness, our body in space, this idea of force modulation, so that when you go, for example, if you were to go to a grocery store and pick up a gallon of milk, your proprioceptive system has had that experience before of doing that and knows how much force to pick it up. If you've ever had the experience of picking up a box that you thought weighed more, and you just had a mismatch with your proprioceptive system. All right. So these are just, again, these are some images of, while no sense ever works alone, these pictures highlight what I call more intense proprioceptive based activities. And so I just love the picture of this dad and this boy roughhousing. In fact, we use a lot of, roughhousing and wrestling in some of our intervention, because of not only the deep tactile pressure that it gets, but the resistance, the pushing and the pulling and the crawling, and obviously all of the nonverbal cues that happen in that type of play. And then, this little boy hanging from the monkey bars here, and obviously we've all done kind of a wheelbarrow position before. All of these create a lot of input to muscles, joints. And so when I think about the purpose and the function of this, yes, it gives us our body map and body awareness, but every time we move, it is building this map in our brain and creating a sense of me-ness, my embodied self. And that's how we're going to interact with the world. By having a sense of our body in space, we can be able to project that out. It's funny, because even using tools in your hands is actually, the way your brain thinks about it, is an extension of your body. Have you ever had the experience where you're driving and you go under a very low bridge and you duck with your car? Like that's really going to do anything if you duck with your car going under a bridge. But what's happened is you've embodied, your brain thinks you've embodied this car with you, and you guys are going under this little bridge together. And so, it makes me think about that little girl that we watched in the still face. And, while she had some great communication skills, she didn't have verbal language yet, but she embodied these motor patterns and these motor movements, which we could say are motor planning. But if she didn't have this sense of my body in space, would she have been able to project that perfect little point that she did to get mom's attention? And, the ways that she moved her body in synchrony to a game that she knew with mom, would she have been able to do that if she didn't have this proprioceptive sense working well for her? So the vestibular system, this could be a whole lecture in and of itself. It's a very fascinating system. And it starts in these very small receptors in our inner ear. We have the the vestibular organ lives in the same organ as our auditory, the cochlear there. So they actually share the same gelatinous material. They share a cranial nerve together. But there are receptors there that detect our relationship to gravity. And so this is what helps us remain upright, but also helps us to detect that more linear, vertical or horizontal type of movement, different head position changes. And then you have parts of the vestibular system which detect acceleration. It detects rotational movement. And so from this, yes, we do develop our balance, but it supports our posture. It supports our eye and ocular motor skill. But because of some of the extensive neurological connections, it touches many parts of our brain, some of which support our arousal or our state regulation, and obviously our motor organization. And the other piece to your vestibular system is it develops very early on in utero and is very highly functioning. It's one of the vestibular cochlear nerve is one of the first to myelinate. And so, from a evolution standpoint, I think it had to play a significant role in getting the body ready for being able to move when we came out of the womb. And it's, from a clinical perspective, we have seen challenges in vestibular processing with children whose mothers were on bed rest or they were in a breech position in utero. So there's something happening there early on. And the other piece, while our vestibular system is working along with mom's movements in utero, it's not until they enter the world that those gravity receptors are then sort of activated. That pull of gravity is at birth is what really kind of stimulates a lot of our posture muscles to start pushing itself against gravity so we can eventually get ourselves upright. And it's Dr. Jean Ayres, who developed this theory, really felt that your relation. There we go. I was going to wait because she felt that our vestibular system was one of our most primal relationships, and our relationship to gravity was really what helped us center everything that we developed later on. So it's pretty powerful. So interoception, again, this could also be another topic in and of itself. I feel like there's been a lot of buzz around it and a lot of research around this area recently. But basically, this is what provides us with information from our internal world, our hunger cues, bathroom cues, tense muscles, racing heart. It tells us the state of our body. And from this state of our body, we often make meaning of our emotions from that. And we can go in a lot of different directions with interoception, but the next few slides that I have in your handouts, they are very detailed, and I'm not going to probably do it justice, but the message that I want to kind of get across are a couple of things. One is this organ, the insula. The insula itself is what we currently know about the insula, I'll say. I feel like brain science changes all the time, but what we currently know about the insula is that this is where our interoception information goes to. And not only our bodily sensation, but plays a role in our emotions. And so what's fascinating about the insula is the neurological circuitry that it is involved in. And what I mean by that is the insula communicates with parts of our brain that contribute to parental responsiveness, the anterior cingulate cortex, as it says here. This part of the brain is only found in mammals, and specifically to listen for vocalizations, for responsiveness in child baby rearing. It also has connections to certain cells that deal with empathy. And again, these are cells that are only found in highly empathetic mammals, and here, like humans, hopefully, elephants, apes, dolphins. And then the next slide, it goes even further to go to higher cortex areas which deal with our emotional regulation, our reflective processing. And so if we think about this circuitry of information that communicates together, it really shows how the brain is built for that reflective functioning, that responsiveness, that ability to empathize. And so we are built to do that, and information that helps to communicate comes from our own internal body. So I find that really fascinating because we have some questions. Let me just finish this last thought, and then I'm going to open it up to, I love that there's questions. I was hoping there was questions at this part. So right on time. But I see a wide range of children who don't have an awareness of what's happening internally. And what they look like, a lot of times they come to us as our feeding and eating or our picky, restricted eaters. And sometimes they come to us as our highly dysregulated clients. They don't have any cue to give them to let them know what's going on inside. And in fact, I've started seeing an adult who has not felt any sense of hunger since she was 7. She has not felt hungry at all. And this is what's kind of labeled her as having an eating disorder, because she has no sense of hunger, no desire to eat. And, as we kind of learned about things about her, she doesn't really have any cues of going to the bathroom. So there's this interoception piece for her was huge. And through intervention, she has started feeling hungry very recently. But it gives me thought of what's happening if you don't have a sense of what is going on in your body. You don't have those interoception cues. How does that talk to those other parts of your brain? Okay, so I see the chat box is lighting up.
So it's my question, so I'll give it to you.
I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other again.
As you were talking about that, I was wondering.
Slides. Okay, Dorothy put a really nice comment. Let me just, did it move this? Oh, there we go. Okay, so now we come to like what really is sensory processing. So we talked about the senses by themselves. They do not work by themselves or in isolation. They are always in communication with each other. So, and so what is sensory processing? So here's a little definition here: the neurological process that organizes sensation from one's own body and from the environment and makes it possible to use the body effectively within the environment. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. All of this talk gets my nervous system all charged up. So let me see. Okay, there we go. And so what are some of the outcomes that we want to see from processing sensory information? Well, we want to be able to co-regulate, self-regulate, develop motor skills, purposely and goal-oriented behavior within our environment, social engagements and relationships, and even cognitive development. And not so much cognitive, I mean, sometimes I've worked with kids who are smarter than me. It's not so much that, but get the capacities that they're able to get to those cognitive resources when they need to is more what I think about here. So I really enjoy this slide as far as a visual. It's very simplistic in nature, but it has all of our senses on, you can see here on this side of the screen, all of the different sensory inputs that we were getting at the same time. We will include our little interoception here as well. And so our nervous system takes it in for two major processes. One is to what we call modulate. And this helps us, we'll go over all of these particular words, but basically to kind of filter in this information that's coming in so that we can attend, decide if we're safe, decide how we're going to respond and react in the moment. And then we also use this information to understand or interpret what's coming in so that we can use it for skill. And some of this comes out more in these motor-based areas of how we're using our body and coordinating our body together. So sensory modulation is, I think the definitions are important. So here I will read it. Sensory modulation is the ability to take in sensory information from the environment and our body and make the appropriate behavioral response. And then this was Dr. Ayer's definition, the process of increasing and reducing activity to keep the activity harmony with all function of the nervous system. So with modulation, it happens. So again, this could be another sort of neuro talk, but when we take in sensory information, it comes in at a cellular level, and those cells determine what sort of an excitatory response, meaning what's going to kind of alert us, and what's more inhibitory, something that's not going to, change our attention too much. But on a behavioral level, what you will observe, we obviously can't tell if something was excitatory or not, but we can watch behavior and we can watch body posture. And so does what came in match the, does the sensory information that came in match what the body is doing? So, for example, if we were to hear a fire alarm right now, you would want to see us alert, look around, and get out. That would be an appropriate response to taking in that sensory information and creating an adaptive response. Now, would you want a child to do that in the classroom if they heard a book fall in the corner, jump up and run out of the room? No. So this is where it's really helping to, when we take in sensory information, our body really needs to discern what is important to take in and to attend to. One OT that I really enjoy, going to her conferences and listening to her is Kim Barthel. And she kind of describes this as like an equalizer. Like you have all your senses here and your brain is like turning up some so that you'll attend to this, and turning down, other ones so that you're not attending to that at the time. And so it's not quite a filter. It's more of that, because like right now, your nervous system, if we're modulating well, we will just, take out background sounds that could be happening. And we are sort of attending or attenuating to perhaps my voice or the slides that are coming up, because this is where you hopefully are attending. We all have our things going on right now, but ideally that's what could be happening in the moment of our modulation system. All right, so this slide here, this talks about, so what happens when this sort of excitatory response comes in? It changes our arousal system, or our state of the nervous system, so that we know how to attend and respond. And this, I would say this is a fair attempt at kind of showing us what happens in that. So let me bring your attention to what's happening here in the chart. So this on the side here talks about sort of our window of arousal that we have. And then this here being our most optimal. And I don't really like the word optimal because, optimal means it has to match the situation that we're in. But for the sake of this, it's telling us that this is kind of where, would be our baseline, where we would kind of go in and out from. And so here, this A, B, C, and D are talking about different types of nervous systems. And then down here, these pyramids are talking about, for the sake of this talk, we'll say that these are different sensory events that have happened. And depending on the size and frequency, talks about the intensity of some of these sensory experiences. And so as you can see, with each sensory experience, there is a response in our arousal. And so I'm going to focus on B and C. So C here is what we're going to kind of call a more neurotypical response of what's happening. So here, if we're thinking of like a school age child, now some are back at school, so they're getting ready for school, they're going into school, they're there's recess and lunch, and then they come home. And so this is what's happening in this neurotypical nervous system, where their arousal goes up, but it also comes down after these experiences. Now, this kiddo does kind of sit in this window of optimal for some time. They have the same sort of hills that happen after a sensory response, but their nervous system is not really bringing them back down. This sensory information is, what we'll say, not modulating well, and that they're getting overwhelmed. So these are the kids that come home from school and fall apart. These are the kids that the teacher says, he or she does fine at school, but mom and dad are saying, oh my goodness, when he or she comes home, she's like a bear and she has tantrums. And so some of this is what's happening. Now, like I said, I think it's a fair attempt, because arousal, or state of our nervous system, is not just impacted by our sensory system. It's also impacted by the type of demands that we're asked to do, the type of relationships that we are in at the time. So all of those are, as well as sort of the internal emotional experience of an individual, all of those contribute to our state of arousal. So as well as not everyone has this huge band of optimal arousal. I see kids who, you get them, their band is very, very short. And so you get them there for a second and then they're gone out of it. So, but it kind of illustrates a little bit of what's happening. All right, so how do we know if someone has modulation difficulties? What might it look like? Now, this is not an exhaustive list by any means. And I also want to say that this does not mean that this child clearly has modulation issues. We all have our own sensory preferences. There are things that we all don't like. And it's more thinking about what sort of clusters together, how often it happens, the intensity of a reaction that might happen, that tells me a little bit more. Is this leading more into the direction of a difficulty or a challenge? And so some things that we might notice are, avoiding being messy. And these are, I'll say, more related to children, young children. Infants would look a lot different, and toddlers, you might see some avoidance as well, and upset with dressing in particular. So avoidant to impose touch, fidgets, picky, restricted eating. From a visual standpoint, there might be a lot of blinking, covering eyes, looking away, easily distracted. I'm sure we've all seen the child who needs to cover their ears, becomes upset. They are also the children who sometimes enjoy making loud sounds themselves, will hum and sing and talk really loudly. Obviously, foods and smells can create some sort of disgust responses of gagging or avoiding certain foods. And then there's also this sort of drive for sensory input that you might see, sort of a need or craving for certain types of sensations, like tactile input. So this is like cuddling and holding and squeezing really tightly. Proprioceptive inputs, jumping, crashing, roughhousing, almost to a point of like, not satiating from it, needing so much of it that it's continuous. And seeking out lots of movement at all times. Now, children should seek out movement. Children should do that. It's more what I tend to notice is it becomes distracting. It's almost like they have to be doing it in order to fill in the blank. It's not like they get that input and then they can kind of transition to something else that's not giving them that input. Okay, should any questions right now? I'm just gonna stop sharing because I can't see everybody if there is. We're good. All right. We'll keep going then.
At some point, you want to speak to the question of sleep and sensory challenges. Not necessarily now, but that is an outstanding question in the chat.
Yes, yes. Boy, if I could solve sleep too, right? Wouldn't that be great? I would love to have Dorothy do a discussion about that too. Sleep is so important. Okay. Nope. There we go. So in that chart that I showed you about, we have our sensory systems and then there's two major processes that happen. One is this idea of sensory discrimination. This is where it kind of, bypasses, a lot of the sensory modulation information that we were talking about goes to areas like the amygdala and our reticular activating system, things that are going to change our level of arousal or our state. Sensory discrimination goes to more of our sensory motor cortex, where it's being integrated with other sensory information, but also laying out that body map that we talked about. And so this is where we're now interpreting that sensory information coming in so that, we can navigate a playground, so that we can use tools with our fingers, so that we can balance across a balance beam, so that we can tolerate swinging and know how fast we're going. And this is what's going to lead to higher level motor skill as well. So these are just some areas of when I think about sensory discrimination, this is where we'll see body awareness, movement and balance awareness, our ability to touch discriminate. So that's how you go into your pocket and you're pulling out, your chapstick and not your tissue, because you can feel. Have you ever had your gloves on and you're trying to get something out of your purse and you're like, I can't feel anything? That would be because you don't have, that really tactile discreteness that you need to find things. And obviously there's your auditory discrimination, being able to pick out sounds and where they're coming from and what they are, and visual discrimination, which is a little bit bigger as far as, things like color and foreground, background information. So what might it look like if a child has discrimination challenges? A lot of times we can see this in more motor-based skills. It will be a quality of motor, tripping, falling, bumping into things, beyond the age that they should be falling, tripping. Lack of personal space. These are the ones who are always kind of if you sit next to them, they kind of lean on you. Maybe there's a safety awareness to being overly cautious to completely unaware of their own safety. So it can kind of fall in a range. And when I think about infants and very young children, I'm thinking about slow to develop motor milestones. They're often the kiddos who did not like tummy time or did not like being on their bellies, did not crawl. So this is, again, it's not an exhaustive list by any means. It's just some things to think about. Now, okay, so I'm going to stop sharing because there's a video and I can't play it from here because it does something weird on my laptop. So, technology. Let me stop sharing. And then Linda, you have a question. Have it up. Now this video, what I'll say about it is it's a compilation of children who may present with sensory challenges. I personally would like more information about them, but it kind of gives you an example of what it might look like from a visual standpoint. So I'm going to share my screen again. This poor kid, right? I already see it on his face. He's not happy. And let's see if I can get it. Oh, you know why? I know why that's not working, because that's my slide. That's not the video. Okay, here we go. Now this little girl, just looking at her, yes, she does have some tactile defensiveness big time. So I'm going to hit play and you will see what this little sweetheart does on this grass. You look at her stiffening up those little shoulders. Oh boy. Those toes come right off the ground. Look at her body posture. So hair brushing is a very common, I did shut the sound off. There were some things that were a little disheartening with what was being said. So we'll just use it for visual. New shoes. The dad was asking, you don't like Bert? And this kid said no. This little boy is holding this shirt far from his skin. Let's just look at this boy's face. I mean, he is just not happy, very worried. And if you watch his hands, you'll see this pull away response. And this is Play-Doh. Again, something fairly benign, but his nervous system does not interpret it that way. Now, we can definitely see that this poor child is distressed. Again, when we talked about the mouth area, it is a highly densely populated area for our tactile receptors. And so it's going to be highly astute. And this is where you might see even higher levels of reaction to tactile stimuli because of that. I mean, he can't even close his mouth around it. His breathing has changed. Oh, toothbrushing is another fun activity of the day for parents who have children with tactile sensitivities. This one's hard to see, but I wish we could see it better. So here's the mom coming in and giving her a hug, and the girl pushes mom away. This little girl has a little scrape on her finger, and well, we won't say little. What's obviously not little to her. So this mom was letting him know that she's going to turn on the vacuum. And he said he was going to try really hard not to be scared. Oh, look at him trying so hard. I love that the mom warned him and she was going to tell him, I'm going to turn it on. And then this girl hears a plane in the background. So you see the startle. Did you see the startle look she had? The eyes opened, immediately made a response. And it's barely audible, by the way, in this video, but the mom says, oh, that's a plane going by. I'll tell you when it leaves. The mom said it was gone and then it came back. Poor thing. So very, very vigilant. Ooh, yep, it's back. But I love here that she looks to mom, right? She's scared and she looks to mom to just check in to be like, what's going on? What's that sound? This little boy said he's hiding under here because it smelled like onions. He was trying to, oh yeah, it says it on here. He was hiding from the smell of the onions. I think some kids would hide from smell of onions, but So this poor kid's in a swing and does not want to be in a swing. Oh, poor thing, gripping on. So I'm gonna pause it here. This one's very skeptical of this elevator. Not really sure what he thinks about that. I'm not convinced that this girl is terribly clumsy. She's on a pretty dynamic surface of a bed, so this is kind of common, you know, coming very careful and cautious. Again, my question would be, how long has he been going up and down stairs? Does he have stairs at his house? Is this an experience that he knows? So, but the idea is they move very slowly and cautiously. So I'm gonna stop it there. The rest is kind of interesting, but so we have another thing here. My son with autism would only eat crunchy foods at a young age, would not have time for questions. And I'm noticing the time here. Okay. All right. So we do have a couple more things. Are we okay if we do a couple more slides? We're good. Okay. So, you know, what I was kind of prepping you for of, you know, with this foundation of our, we'll say, sensory discrimination skills right now, being able to interpret that sensory information that's coming in for balance and body awareness, you know, tactile perception, we can now use our body to motor plan. This is when we can kind of conceptualize an idea in our head. We can plan and sequence it out, and we can execute it. And go even further to know whether or not it worked, because we've gotten the feedback from our body. You know, we've all probably had this experience if you've taken like a dance class or a workout class as an adult and it's something new to you. You know, how hard are you thinking in it? Just sort of figure out the moves. This is kind of your motor planning in action. And so sometimes when I'm, you know, motor planning it's not always quickly observed in just one kind of setting, but you might see limitations in their ideas, or variation to play would be limited. Sometimes difficulty making decisions. They might be the ones that sort of easily follow the group, or they might always have to make the rules and say exactly how we're going to play. I see a lot of those. You stand there and you say this, and you're going to hold it like that. They might tend to avoid physical or motor tasks, and they can have some challenges. These aren't the only kiddos that have challenges with transitions, but sometimes that is the reason that they do. It's interesting. I went to a preschool to observe a little guy, and the concern was this preschool was, they were just lovely. They were so good. You know, they saw him having a really hard time at the Play-Doh table. You know, when it was time for some independent play, he would become more upset, and, you know, he basically was throwing himself on the ground, having tantrums. And so they were thinking that he was getting overwhelmed by, you know, the classroom and the stimuli. And when I observed him, I was like, oh my goodness, this poor guy has no ability to motor plan. He couldn't figure out what to do at the Play-Doh table. He had no idea how to move his body or move his little fingers to make whatever they were making there. And the same thing would happen outside, where he would just fall apart because he had no idea how to move his body. So this is where, you know, you really have to kind of observe behavior. It's not, it could look like he was overwhelmed, but the truth of the matter was he was having a really hard time moving and planning his body. So posture and core, posture and central stability. I'm kind of changing my words for this. I have really enjoyed, there's this PT, Shelley Mannell. She's from Canada, and she does a lot of work with posture, not only from the standpoint of holding us upright, but thinking about how it supports our regulation. And so it's really fascinating work. And why I'm talking about it here is because so much of our sensory information supports our posture. Our vestibular system is connected to every muscle in our body to hold us upright. And the piece about so I think that's important to know, that our sensory system contributes to how our posture and core are working. But our core also has a huge impact to our ability to regulate. And so I want to kind of erase from your mind core as thinking like, I feel like from a, I feel like the general population thinks of core like 6-pack abs, and we're not thinking 6-pack abs at all. Okay. We're not even talking about those muscles that are there. So I like the term central stability because it gives you a different impression. It's not about strength. It's about how stable is this to hold us up. And so there are 4 major muscles in our core, and they actually work. They're inserted and attached to each other because they have to work in a synergy and they have to work in a relationship. So every time your diaphragm moves to take a breath, your pelvic floor needs to support your internal organs so they don't fall out. And so here, these are just some pictures of what I think about when we think of central stability. Like, look at this baby right here in this prone position, and the head is upright. The eyes are looking in the same direction there. Nice symmetry in the body. The head and neck look nicely relaxed. This little guy has some nice central stability. This baby here is just beautiful. And I mean, I was just like gawking at this picture thinking, wow, look how beautiful that is. She has her body is being used in different ways on each side, but she has this beautiful weight shift and her head is tilted, but look how her eyes are engaged and focused. And she has this thing in her mouth too, which could be stabilizing her. But the piece I want to talk about is breath. Because when we were doing that exercise yesterday about, the inhale for 4, hold for 5, exhale for 6. So when you inhale, you are stimulating your sympathetic nervous system. But when you exhale, it's stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system. And so the quality of your breath is supported by your core and your postural stability. So your core holds you, and then all these other posture muscles can kind of work and hold themselves up against that as well. So I want you to take a breath in this position. So we're all going to need to do this together, where you're going to lift your shoulders. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can see everyone do this. So you're going to lift your shoulders and you're going to kind of round them forward. And then you're going to kind of bring your neck and a little bit of extension there. And then I want you to try to take a deep breath. Now I want you to do just the opposite. You're going to bring your shoulders back and down, tuck your chin a little bit. And now I want you to take a deep breath. What were the differences that you felt?
I definitely had a very hard time taking a deep breath hunched over like that. I barely got it up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really strange. That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And then did you feel like you had more room when you took your shoulders down and you're like,
For
oh, I have all this space I can breathe in now.
Sure.
So if this core and central stability is not working, we tend to compensate by using other muscles. And what we do is we, clench. I mean, and even think about all the posture we're getting ourselves into with all this computer work and being on our laptops a lot. We're all kind of hunched over, but we're tightening our shoulders, or we might be pulling our shoulder blades back. Our neck is in awkward positions. And I see this a lot with a lot of the children that I see. And it's interesting because not only does your brain give your posture muscles feedback as to how to hold itself up, but your posture in your core is also giving your brain information about the position that it's in. And so breathing like this, short and shallow, tells your breath you're going to be in a more alert, sympathetic nervous system state. And so think about that. Like for some kids, I mean, I see a lot of kids who their breath is really short and shallow. And how much of that's contributing to their ability to regulate? It could be contributing a lot. So, I think that it is coming down to the body again. Susan's example of her client that was constantly kind of moving and running. I wonder what her posture looks like. I wonder what her breath looks like. We have a question here, and it says, I have a 6-year-old client who has a sensory process. I wanted to talk about a couple of things here. So when I think about, when we kind of pull a lot of this together, you know, how does sensory processing, you know, impact, you know, the relationships? And so I'm even going to use, you know, an example of, think about a newborn and this sort of, you know, all of this serve and return that's happening, you know, and how they're getting cues from their caregiver and their environment is through their sensory system. And these cues, let's say that this is moving into a, you know, what we would want to see in a co-regulated experience, is that these cues that they will be developing are giving them their sense of safety. You know, from smells to movement to sounds to touch that are happening. And we can also think of, in the absence of that, what type of cues are those babies left with? So if we think of neglect or abuse, or, you know, perhaps an unresponsive caregiver, you know, what type of sensory cues are they getting, and not building this sense of safety. I think the other piece that I think about with this too is, you know, Claudia talked about some of Bruce Perry's work, and when asked about the impact of developmental trauma, he really felt that it impacts sensory processing and regulation. And so, of course, that's going to have an impact on the individual and will impact how they regulate in the dyad together. The other thing is sort of this goodness of fit. And I can send this out. I actually have it as a PDF, but this is something that we've used a lot at our center, and it's a family sensory preference checklist. And I would say this is more for an older child, probably not for an infant toddler. But you can always make your own if you wanted. The idea of it is to start to think about, what does my child enjoy and what do I enjoy? And it's funny, we had run some, you know, a parent group at our center, and we had all the parents fill this out, and every single one of them had very different sensory needs in their child. And it wasn't till some of them filled this out that they realized that. They're like, oh, no wonder why it's so hard for me to play with my child or be with my child, because this is what they most enjoy and that is what I least enjoy. And so we use this as sort of a starting point to think about what's sort of in the neutral zone. What is something that you sort of neutrally feel, you know, similar about, and start there. And so, you know, I've had this experience with a parent who is more sensory sensitive and defensive, and she finds that her son's touch is very uncomfortable to her. And her son has even said, "My love hurts you." And it just crushes her, because you'll see her like kind of hold her body and brace for, you know, for him to kind of come in for a hug. And so, you know, we've been working together to find games that they can do. And they actually enjoy being in this Lycra hammock together. It gives mom enough tactile input, and it gets him to get some of that more intense input that he enjoys. But, you know, it was through figuring out what both of their nervous systems needed to create this goodness of fit for both of them. And there's so much more we could talk about, but we'll.